to a previous video we did on obliques, and some of the sound was stuffed up, I think from me messing it up. But anyway, this video I'm going to sort of discuss the true function of the obliques and give you a bit of an insight as to how some of the training we do for it doesn't really meet the needs of actually how it works. So firstly, abuse of abdominal exercises. So a lot of the choices of abdominal exercise that we've become used to seeing and we think is good for the core is all based upon the method of origin and insertion of muscles. So basically applying the same sort of training stimulus as what we would for a bicep curl to make that stronger. We think, well, the same sort of thing we would do for the abdominals, and in theory it should make it stronger. Unfortunately, that's not exactly how it works, and really one of the main areas that's abused in the abdominal training is the obliques. So there's no doubt they're very important, but in terms of like sort of going back to that, thinking of it as a twisting muscle and how it works, how its anatomical function works of like it doing the twisting, we really should be thinking about what it's actually meant to do. And in most of the cases that when it works is actually when it doesn't move us. So this is where we say we want to control the frontal plane. With planes of motion, there's a sagittal plane that moves in a straight line. That's the one that most exercises are working in. Then there's this frontal plane, which is where the body moves from side to side, and then there's a transverse plane that does the rotational type things. The area that the obliques are really important with, and where we see most injuries happen, is in the frontal plane. So a lot of bulging discs are because of lateral flexion, and a lot of knee injuries are because of lateral movement. All right, so these two joints are really heavily injured, both for the same reason and lack of control around that. Now, to blame it only on the obliques is not true, but they do play a crucial role in it, which I'll hope to explain as we go on. So basically the key on this part in this slide here is they provide assistance. I probably should have highlighted that word, assistance, to many of the complex movements. All right, so that's understanding what I talk about when I'm saying frontal plane. All right, so firstly, why do people to strengthen them? I sort of touched on it a minute ago, but there's two main reasons that a lot of people devote a lot of time and effort to using abdominal training sort of techniques. And the first one is to try and get a flat stomach, and unfortunately that's you don't really need to do these. No matter how many you do, you might never get a flat stomach. And the second thing is they believe a strong core will prevent injury. Unfortunately, both of these assumptions are incorrect. All right, there's plenty of people with a strong core that have a huge amount of back pain, and actually part of their back pain is because of their strong core. And the flat stomach, you really get that from eating well. So this is where this quote here from Gray Cook is an awesome quote to keep in mind, because if you want to see your abs, you really need to eat better, and if you want them to work better, then you really need to move better. Don't isolate them. They're really not the answer in either of those things. So where are the obliques if you're not sure? Well, there's a picture of where they are, and it gives you a bit of a deeper understanding. So the rectus abdominis is the six-pack muscle that most people are familiar with, and the obliques are sitting on the outside. Now there's also an external one, which is the one you see, and there's also an internal one. So as I touched on before, their function is to laterally flex the trunk and to rotate the trunk, but they're very heavily involved in spinal stabilisation, where there'll be no movement. You won't be visible any movement anywhere. All right, so the internal oblique is the muscle that we see underneath, but its function is sort of similar to the external, except it rotates ipsilaterally instead of contralaterally. So ipsilateral means it's sort of on the same side. So if we were to move this way, the internal oblique is going to fire on this side, and the external oblique is going to fire on the other side. All right, so the internal guys are sort of referred to as same side rotators, if that makes sense. So the big mistake people make is what we were saying before. They try to think, okay, basing an exercise to strengthen it, like with side plank for the lateral flexion, and say a rotating sitting exercise, or even if it's standing and they're just trying to do it slowly, make it really burn like you would with any other muscle. Unfortunately, you're really going to ruin the way that the muscle functions by doing that. The side plank has some purpose to it. I don't mind this one to some degree, which we'll get into at the end, but the thing that this sort of lacks is it doesn't really teach how the muscle integrates and with the legs, especially with the legs really instigating most of the movements, because the muscles themselves really have no power to move you without them. They're really dependent on the arms and the legs to do everything for you. They're just the glue that holds everything together and really creates the efficient timing that you need. And it's usually, as I'll put down the bottom here, when you're working them separate from their partners is when you ruin the timing. Alright, so you could make them stronger, but it'll be at the expense of how they move. So rotational movement, some people will say that twisting is really bad and shouldn't be done, and to some degree they're right. Twisting of the lumbar spine is very dangerous, and this is where we would see a torn disc, so a disc tear, which is a bit different from a bulging disc. And we will see that from poor rotation, but to say rotation is bad is not true. It's just rotation of the spine is not right. Rotation of the thoracic spine and the hips, this is very important. They're actually essential, because if you can't do it, then you're really going to have to move like a robot. Alright, so you won't even be able to walk and run, because there's some element of rotation needed to do that. Alright, so the problem is not with rotation, it's with how it's done, and usually it's when it's done poorly without incorporating the legs, and the legs are disconnected from the movement and the timing's wrong. Usually it's too slow. So I'll put here, timing's everything, and a great quote here from Vladimir Janda: the unconscious reaction and speed of contraction are the most important for functional stability, not their strength. And this is the most important thing to understand with abdominals. So the problem's not with rotation, but more of how it's done. So this is a poor choice of rotation. This will only really load the back over time. No matter how much you tell me your abs are burning, you're really seriously loading the spine here, because there's no way you can use your legs. They actually removed your legs from it. So you're actually teaching yourself to create rotation without the legs, but and the movement will be so slow, you'll be putting force into areas that should never have seen it. Alright, so this is not a good choice of exercise. So a correct way would be doing things standing, so where I'm actually getting a weight shift where I'm loading the leg up, the leg instigates the movement, and the obliques sort of control it and help to transfer the energy that's coming from the leg up through the torso and out the arms. So if I'm throwing something, this is awesome, because I'm getting a huge energy transfer. If I'm standing still, there's no energy transfer. If I'm kneeling, there's none. If I'm sitting, there's none. And if I've got my sitting on the ground with, I'm definitely got none. So I'm really sort of like exposing the spine to serious problems if I do this any other way than standing. Alright, there may be a purpose if we do it kneeling. At times we might use that to show the correct arm action, sometimes to control rotation. So sometimes people can over rotate on this. Alright, but the key is most of the time, for the correct timing, it needs to be done fast and it needs to be done standing. Now this is where it gets a bit messy, because that's just looking at pure rotation, but what about when we're trying to control rotation, we're doing similar movements, or movements that we don't even regard as an abdominal exercise. And this is where the slings come into it, and where there's anterior slings where we're moving this way, so running, throwing, pushing, and posterior sling, again running, but on the other side. So this is where we start to see the glutes work with the lats, and you notice how everything's sort of like working opposite sides. So in the case of Luke here, how he's pulling with his right hand, but his left leg's the loaded leg, which is the same here. The left leg is the loaded leg, and the right arm is sort of pulling through. And on this side, the opposite, from the front side of things. This is where the obliques are playing the role of communicating. So this right arm to the left leg, and same thing here. All right, so the obliques are the common denominator in all of these movements we make, because they're what keep it efficient and stop us from flexing and losing our position and falling over to the side, or hip hiking, all those things. So you can only gain strength and get fitter if these movements are efficient. Alright, so training the correct timing is what makes the obliques stronger and makes them function better. Putting the brakes on, so we have to consider how the obliques control the rotation and actually prevent it. Instead of trying to enhance it, we're trying to actually stop it. So in the case of when we throw, we have to have a point where we quickly decelerate and contract in the opposite direction. And this is where the obliques on the opposite side are actually more important to you than the ones that are accelerating. Even in change of direction movements, and we see this a lot with ACL injuries, where they're planting on the foot that's going to cut. So in the case of this defender here, if he changes that ball between his legs to go back the other way, and this guy's got to react to it, his obliques have to actually hold his position right, or he's going to fall that way. Alright, so they have to be trained to be very, very fast, not necessarily slow and have muscle definition, but they have to be very quick because that's their function. All right, so doing this exercise will do very little to help that movement. All right, and if anything, this will actually create like some potential for herniation of discs, which is ironic because you might be using it to prevent it. All right, so there's much better choices of training the abs than thinking of their origin and insertion. All right, so repetitive flexing the trunk here to one side is the greatest way to start creating problems. So I would avoid this movement at all costs. All right, so this is the lateral flexion. So if that was putting the brakes on, and this was the slings, and this is rotation, this is the lateral flexion. So better. This is another exercise where we might see lateral flexion trained. I've never used this exercise where this is trying to train it for its concentric action, where I would be preferring to train it for anti-flexion, where I'm trying to avoid the lateral flexion, avoid what it can do and prevent it, because when that happens during these exercises is when you can't walk. It's when we see a Trendelenburg gait and hip, all sorts of hip hiking, back pain's inevitable. So these exercises are great for actually training the obliques with lateral flexion, but actually resisting the lateral flexion, if that makes sense. Suitcase carries are awesome oblique exercise. Most people would not even know it's training their obliques. So classic example of a weakness in the lateral sling is where we see the hip and pelvic sort of like laterally flexing all the time. So remember what we saw before, the posterior sling. The lateral sling is connecting these glutes to the stance leg, so in this case the left leg here and the right leg there, to the adductors and the QL on the other side. So the QL is sort of opposite to the oblique, and that's another muscle that's really trying to resist rotation and flexion. Even though it can provide it, it doesn't really want to do too much. That's when you develop trigger points, and usually because of weakness through the glutes, which might be from the feet as well. So anytime we start to see this, we know there's going to be a weakness around that area. All right. So why don't we just isolate the glutes if we think the glutes are a problem? Well, isolating might help in some way, but will not change a motor program like running and walking, because the program is using multiple muscles at once. It could be the feet that are all the problem behind the glutes. It could be no weakness with the muscles, it's just the way that you coordinate it through your brain. All right, so that's where the suitcase carry has a much greater chance of achieving the objective of improving both, because you will instantly sense that you can't do it if you're rocking side to side. So that's why we call it a self-correcting exercise, because the load actually teaches you what you're lacking. It's telling you what's missing. So you don't have the strength in the glutes or the obliques to be able to walk with that amount of load, and if with enough practice and good training, you'll actually end up correcting it. You may use some of these things and they may be useful, but on their own they won't do very much for you at all. So another example is the knee injuries, and again, this could be part of it, may be the obliques, how they're not working, because maybe you've been training them at the wrong intensity and the wrong timing. So blaming the knee for this sort of a problem is really ignorance to how it works with everything else. So as I mentioned before, presenting ACL tears relies heavily on the corks. It's where we see the shoulder sway, which we touched on before. So in a cutting movement, the obliques are and the anti-rotators. So for her to change direction and not blow her knee out, she has to maintain a perfect position that everything's in alignment, or otherwise the knee's going to get twisted, and that's what blows right through the ligament. So that'll be an example of being too upright and maybe laterally flexing, and the knee's the one that cops it because it's the last joint sort of left. That's sort of heading the wrong way as his trunk's heading that way. So the way we may be training to prevent the shoulder sway is trying to add resistance to things. So when I'm in the example here, I'm pulling to him, so try and, as he was exploding over to this side, I was trying to actually make him shoulder sway so that he would resist the shoulder sway. So as much as it's an explosive movement, we think it's only about the legs. I'm trying to teach his body position how to all communicate within a split second. So the obliques here is a crucial factor in him maintaining position for the knee. Timing is essential, so a medicine ball trainer might use like a medicine ball with explosive cut to the other side to teach him how to maintain that position. Again, this is not the strength that's important, it's the timing. So because the muscle itself, remember, it doesn't have a lot of power to move you, it just it needs the legs to do so. Its role is really to just maintain position all the time, put the brakes on, and be quick enough to react so that you don't go when you're trying to do the fast cut. Single leg stance, as we touched on before, with the frontal plane. So these are great examples of the obliques working, and so like lateral hopping, I could do single leg squats to begin with single leg deadlifts. Once I sort of throw in the lateral movement, then there's a chance the whole body weight's moving. If I don't have control through here, I'm going to go. Again, I might throw in other things around the knee, so there's glute control. He's got to maintain that good body position, and I could throw in lateral hopping instead of forward hopping. All right, so all of these things are great oblique exercises for how their function truly works. So other exercises I may use, so regressions of those, because they're quite challenging. I might start with inline stability lunge. This is a great way to feel how the obliques work as a reflex muscle in the frontal plane. Quite a tricky drill. If you look in the description on the video, I put links for a lot of these, so you can find see where all these videos of these exercises are, and they're all on the YouTube channel. If you scroll down, you'll see the videos of all of these. The McGill twisting plank. This is a great way to teach torsion on the twisting movement, how to create stiffness so you don't over twist, and how to instigate rotation from the obliques and not the hips. So it's another good regression. The wood chops, as we've discussed, so cable wood chops, medicine ball wood chops, both great, from all different angles, high to low, low to high. Again, the legs are the crucial part with the weight shift. That's the part that's very important. Medicine balls, as I discussed, so tornado balls, even sledgehammers, sled pulls, things like that. They're all great explosive. And notice all these will require fast timing. The first two don't. This one's like controlling it. This one's again controlling it. But all these other ones start to need to move fast. They need fast timing for them to be done correctly. Integrating it into the other movements, so with the sling, so the push, the pulls, and the lunge itself, because the lunge is used in both of these. If you notice that split stance is very important. Mobility might be something, so that you might need to look at. Could be hips, could be thoracic region as well, because without those you won't be able to rotate correctly. So you that may be the problem. You might be lacking mobility in those areas that are supposed to provide it, and if they don't do it, you're sort of cheating on everything. All right, so making sure you get that. In addition to the suitcase carry, which is an awesome oblique exercise, and another one that's very similar is the Turkish get-up. So unique, this exercise, in that it's moving in all the different planes. Stabilisation is its primary focus, but it needs a huge amount of mobility. Again, like the suitcase carry, it's a self-correcting exercise. If you don't get in the right position, you just cannot do it. No matter, coaching is not really going to be what you're lacking. It's going to be either you can't control the stability required, or you can. So it's a yes or no movement. So it's an awesome one for controlling lateral flexion. Great exercise. Everyone should be doing this one. Stability at other joints. So you don't disregard how to do all the other movement patterns. There's a free report that you can get on how to teach you all these. So you can get it from the website. Again, check in the description below. If you've got back pain or anything like knee pain, there's specific programs that run through on how to piece all this together for you. And again, go to the website and you'll find where all those are. But I hope this video gives you a bit of insight into how the obliques work, and there is a lot more to it than just doing some side planks and some isolated abdominal training. It's not really how it works. It's not what it's designed to do. So learn how to integrate it into the movements where it's needed, and especially the timing. If you get the timing right, you'll be doing exactly what it needs. All right, so I hope you enjoy that video. See you on our next one.